Hello, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Royal Photographic Society and to this year's Combined Royal Colleges lecture. It's my pleasure to introduce our host for this evening, Darren Hawkins, the chair of the RPS's medical group. Darren, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. First of all, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to tonight's lecture. It's going to prove interesting, to say the least, certainly an area that I'm vastly interested in. I'm also going to make a very quick apology to everybody. As this is a Zoom meeting and I'm hosting this from home, I happen to have three somewhat restless Springer Spaniels, and if somebody comes to the door, there could be a little bit of barking, and I may have to mute if it happens to be within the next 3 or 4 minutes. So my apologies in advance if that does happen. So yes, this is the Royal Photographic Society's Combined Royal Colleges Medal Award Lecture for 2020. So I'm going to introduce the speaker in just a minute, but a few words first about the award. This goes back a little while, and the Combined Royal Colleges Medal was originally established by the Royal Photographic Society back in 1958, and it was in collaboration with the Royal College of Physicians of London, the Royal College of Surgeons of England, and the Royal College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists. In 2015, they were joined by the Royal College of Psychiatrists and the Royal College of Ophthalmologists. So we now have 5 Royal Colleges collaborating with the Royal Photographic Society for this award. This is a prestigious medal and is awarded for an outstanding contribution to the advancement and/or application of medical photography or the wider field of imaging and medical imaging. The recipient of this award is required to give a lecture a year after receiving the award at one of the 5 Royal Colleges in London. However, as I've just mentioned, this year it's being given virtually. I'm hosting it from home, and Michael from RPS House in Bath. Anyone who is a member or non-member of the society can actually nominate any person, whether they are also a member or non-member of the society and of any nationality. So that means that this award is actually truly international. And to nominate, it's fairly easy. You just go to our website, which is www.rps.org/awards, where you can complete a nomination form. All the details are there about the next closing date, etc., etc., etc. So if there's somebody you wish to nominate for this award, that's where you need to go. So on my behalf, I would now like to congratulate Douglas Anderson, who's the recipient for 2021, for being awarded the Combined Royal Colleges Medal, and also offer congratulations on behalf of all the awards committee and the members as well. So before I actually pass you over to Douglas, I'm just going to give you a brief sort of synopsis, background as to how this all came about and what we're in for tonight as regards a lecture. So this goes back a little while to when Douglas Anderson's 5-year-old son, Leif, permanently lost vision of one eye after a retinal detachment. And that was detected too late, even though Leif was having regular eye examinations. So Douglas considered that because of the uncooperative nature of many young children, the chances of a full retinal examination were about 20%, and that greatly increased the likelihood of undiagnosed problems. He also observed that the manual examination being used was out of date, and other disciplines such as cardiology and orthopedics had much better imaging systems available for comprehensive examinations. Working as a medical technology designer, Douglas set about investigating the possibility of a fast, non-intrusive whole retina scanner that would produce a digital wide-field image of the retina in a single capture. So after years of research, the Optos wide-field camera was invented, which uses a laser technology to produce a 200-degree view of the back of the eye. This enables regular monitoring and means changes in the eye can be detected that would otherwise go unnoticed, using traditional examination techniques and equipment. There are currently about 11,000 Optos devices worldwide, and a staggering 70 to 100 million people have been imaged using the scanner, saving the sight of millions. His technical innovation was recognised as a major step forward, and in 2006 was awarded the Royal Academy of Engineering MacRobert Award. That's the UK's most prestigious prize in the engineering world. Douglas was also named Inventor of the Year in 2008, and in the same year received an OBE. In 2012, he was inducted into the Scottish Engineering Hall of Fame. So with that as a background, I would very much like now to introduce Douglas Adam to produce and give his lecture for the 2021 Combined Royal Colleges Medal. Over to you, Douglas. Thank you.
Thank you, Darren. I trust you can hear me all well enough. And thank you to the Combined Royal Colleges for making this award. I do understand the tremendous privilege that it is, and I'm very grateful for it. The development of Optos technology has been long in gestation, and I think we're just entering our 30th year. So I think it's appropriate, perhaps, that I do give you the full backstory. And I'll start before, in fact, the start of the company, and I'll move through the motivation, which Darren explained in brief, and then the process of doing the development. And finally, I'll describe the technology and some of the ongoing story associated with the company and its capabilities. So my early life was really dedicated to adventure, wilderness mountaineering, until such time as I accidentally began a family. And not wishing to be to give up my previous lifestyle, I tried to continue. And here you see my young family on one of our typical expeditions. And perhaps you don't invite your neighbors to pack, but we had a lot of stuff to pack when we went on our expeditions. And this is a typical annual family expedition. You can see here a ton of equipment, including boats and nappies and food for 6 weeks. And you know, we would fly up into the Arctic, and we might have as many as 20 remote camps, completely unsupported. We'd travel in our little boat, which we shipped up there. We might travel as much as 1,000 miles. This is a particularly bleak day in northeast Greenland. You can see they're having fun on the beach. We're also trek inland, very slow family expeditions, obviously. But the family was totally committed to this way of life, and I used my design work to finance all these trips. And I didn't think much beyond that. My son was born severely short-sighted, minus 15 diopters, requiring a large amount of correction to give him normal vision. For those of you unfamiliar with the eye and the retina, well, essentially it's a camera with a film at the back with a lot of photoreceptors and an autofocus lens at the front. If a child, a patient, is extremely short-sighted, then that eye will be exceptionally long and the retina will be stretched. Now, we were happily going along until around about 1990. My son was at high risk for retinal detachment, and inadequate methods of examination meant that when the retina of his left eye detached, it wasn't detected until too late, when corrective surgery was all but pointless. This is not my son's eye, but it's typical of the sort of major detachment that happens in a short-sighted eye. Up in the top left, I use the expression ouch, but actually a retinal detachment is not painful. And of course, in a small child, can be worked around. So it's up to others to identify the issue and treat it. So in the months that followed what turned out to be failed surgery, I observed many examinations conducted on my son by his surgeon, who was a very expert surgeon, by the way. During one of these examinations, I was convinced that his observations were not thorough, could not be thorough, because in part of my son's difficulty in following his instructions. when I questioned the completeness of the examination, the surgeon responded, "You must understand, I'm only getting a glimpse." I have to say, I was pretty shocked by this confession, and I decided that it would be appropriate to have a go at designing a device that would radically improve routine examination, particularly on children. And that year in particular, after the failed surgery, well, we didn't go to Greenland, but we did drift down the Yukon River in Canada for some weeks. And this statement of Leif's haunted me all the time. I'm only getting a glimpse. It just didn't seem reasonable. And it became the bedrock, really, of the company's motivation going forward, because obviously we had a lot of resistance to the idea that manual examination had its limitations. But Hector Chola's statement stuck with me. There's a drawing of the whole retina out to the ora serrata. There's a direct ophthalmoscope, which is typical of the time of retinal examination, particularly in primary eye care. That's a little field of view, which you can see is only a tiny portion. And I think in order to fulfill an imaging session of the whole retina with that device, you would require to build up something like 400 fields of view in the mind's eye. And if you didn't dilate the pupil, you wouldn't get much beyond that field, and that would exclude detection of any peripheral detachments or holes. A significantly better device was the binocular indirect ophthalmoscope invented by Dr. Scapins. However, it required a high level of acquired skill and a good deal of patient cooperation, and really was used perhaps by very few specialists, retina specialists, at the time perhaps as few as 100 in the UK. It was the idea that you could photograph using a conventional camera. Well, it was technically possible, but it was hideously intrusive on the patient. And here's a montage of something like 35 single images all stuck together in order to build up a full view of the retina. And it's still pretty incomplete. And of course, it's torture for the patient. And manual exams, by definition, as with engineers, the doctor's skills are different, and the patient's ability to cooperate was also different. So the outcomes in terms of disease detection is highly variable. So the fundamental challenges were to image 200 degrees of the inside of a 25 millimeters diameter sphere, a typical eyeball, through a 2 millimeter pupil, and importantly, without contacting the cornea, using low levels of light and less time than it takes to blink, and so easy that a child of 5 could do it. That last point was very much the pivotal design criteria, and I rejected many technologies that we investigated because they had no hope of being sufficiently easy to use. As we were developing this technology, others with more credibility than I, connected to institutions, particularly in the US and Israel, were attempting to resolve the same problem. But limitations in field of view and ease of use meant that none of them actually were commercially successful. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of a background to the process that I believe and I have used for the development and commercialization of healthcare technology, or as I sometimes put it, how to manage very ambitious projects, in my case, without money, experience, or people who know what they're doing. That was very much our starting point. And I'm going to use as an example, as an analogy, the process. that I used for this development. So it's a little bit of an aside, but only slightly. I hope you'll find it interesting and appropriate. I was told about some unclimbed mountains in Tierra del Fuego, the bottom of South America, by a chap, Eric Shipton. And I decided, well, okay, I'll go there. Unfortunately, there's a lot of political problems. So I determined that really the practical way to go to avoid those were to go by yacht. I didn't have a yacht, 7,500 miles, didn't have any sailing experience, didn't have any funds at hand. So basically, very much a zero-stage project. And I simply, well, it's silly to say simply, I drew out the whole program on a single sheet of paper. Starting with the construction of the boat, sailing it to South America, and concluding in Valparaiso in 1978. My basic philosophy was to make progress by the accumulation of small steps without getting intimidated by the total distance, because obviously, if you're going to sail to South America and you have no sailing experience, that's a fairly frightening thing to undertake. But first you have to try and raise some money. And you're always kind of squeezed, if you like, between falling off the cliff edge and the multiple rejections from people that are saying, well, you can't do that. You've no experience. You shouldn't even be attempting it. Here's one of our larger donations at that time. It came from the Christian Salvation Company, gave 50 quid to us, which I was very pleased to receive. But essential fundraising skills are persistence, of course, and the ability to deceive oneself that despite all the evidence to the contrary, all will be fine. Now, if you want to build a boat without any money, here's one method anyway. Get some chicken wire and some sand and cement. And bearing in mind that funding will be a major absorber of your time, start with the acceptance that you'll operate constantly underfunded and maximize credibility and minimize overhead. And here's where we are some months after starting that with that chicken wire. We've got the basis of a 60-foot, 36-ton yacht made of chicken wire and sand and cement. Of course, we had a huge number of setbacks and problems. Here's the slipway here, and we're about to put our hull on it. And we've just made the slipway long enough to suit the tide, and the wheels collapse and we miss the tide, and it's a 2-week delay before there's enough water to get the boat off. Anyway, it's all done, but it's October and we should have left a long time ago. And it's a bit scary. We sail off down the North Sea. And of course, Tierra del Fuego hasn't really come any closer. It's still an awful long way away. And particularly when you haven't sailed anywhere and you haven't yet had time to learn how to navigate. But of course, in the principle of just doing things in small steps, well, sailing to Dunbar, which is just a bit down the Forth from Edinburgh, is a good way to start. We never did raise the money. So, you know, we're sailing. Somehow we've managed to get afloat. Total treasury available is £200. That's to last for 8 months and somehow feed 8 people. And of course, we had lots of adventures along the way. But as long as with any enterprise, you ultimately avoid sinking. Here we are, we're 1,000 miles off the West African coast. The engine is full of water. Well, obviously the key is to empty the water out. The engine was flooded, so fix the flooded engine, sort out each problem and sail on in the hope, and in fact, in the knowledge that things will get better. And then there's another aspect with these big projects, and that's to avoid diversions. Here we are in Rio, and we've been at sea for 2 months now, and there's plenty of attractions here. But we have to just stay focused on our mission. And indeed we do. And here's somebody, one of our crew, Dick, who's finally learned how to use a sextant. And it is one aspect of my philosophy, which is that you have to, in life, you often have to go a really long way to find out where you are, whether it's sailing to South America or building technology. But anyway, maybe to everybody's surprise, 30 months after drawing the plan, we entered the Straits of Magellan with a scratch crew, none of whom who had navigated or ever sailed before. We had no experts. Everybody learned on the way, and we became a very cohesive and effective team. But of course, the whole point was not to sail. The point was to actually ascend these mountains, these unclimbed mountains. That was the mission, which we duly did or attempted, and we were successful in 7 or 8 occasions. But often we were, blasted by bad weather, and we would have to hunker down and wait for a break in the weather to make the final summit. Because down there, the Admiralty pilot says 300 days of the year you can expect hurricane force, wind, rain, and snow. For the rest of the time, the weather will be merely unpleasant. And that's fairly true. But of course, we did get to the summit of these peaks. But of course, the ultimate test in these adventures is whether you survive to return home and collect the glory. Not that we were seeking any glory, but along the way, we had many situations where we were, if you like, rescued by unexpected forces, as we were in the development of Optos. Here we are attempting to go through this reef in the Patagonian archipelago. There's no chart, there's no lighthouse, we have no radar, no echo sounder. And what came to our rescue on this occasion was a pod of dolphins who showed us the way through the reef. And that's often the way what I have found in life. If you're just out there trying, sometimes you get help from unexpected directions. Of course, that wasn't the end. Here we are crossing the Patagonian ice cap, which in this case ended up in jail in Argentina, but that's another story. So I'll come back to the process of designing medical devices of equal complexity, starting with no engineers, no manufacturing, no marketing, and no money, judged to be impossible and unnecessary. But bearing in mind my strong belief in the haunting phrase, I'm only getting a glimpse. We pressed on. Fundraising, an uphill struggle, of course. I was actually rejected by every VC in the UK, Europe, and North America, resulting in over 400 rejections over the period. But of course, it doesn't matter how many times you are rejected, as long as somebody says yes somewhere. And standing in the middle there, the chaps on my left and right were the founders of what became Archangel Informal Investors. And they eventually became the biggest angel operation in Europe. And put in a lot more money than they ever knew they had or wanted to put into Optos, probably close on £20 million by the end of the day before we floated. And amusingly, one of those gentlemen, the man on the right, was a chap very seamy, and he was the fellow who gave me 50 quid 15 years earlier. Key decisions. I touched on the systems that had failed because they couldn't acquire the width of scan or the ease of use fell down. And we had two key decisions. One was using lasers to scan a spot very quickly across the retina, because of the high speed of scan, the light levels were not perceived as intrusive by the patient. And so the dilation was not required. Coupling the wide sweep of the laser beam into the pupil plane of the eye using an ellipsoidal mirror gave an ultra-wide field image of the retina without the need to contact the cornea. So those two things were fundamental to our success, and they were arrived at having rejected many alternates. So I'll just show you this little diagram here. The key of an ellipse is that it has two foci. If you fire a beam or a ray through one of them, it will appear at the other. So if you place a scanning system at one foci and place the eye at the other, and if you generate that wide field of scan, then you can reach that 200-degree field. I mean, we're talking about beating the blink here. So we're imaging each spot and then moving the spot. And we have to do that in 0.2 of a second, because that time is the limit that's allowed us by the blink. So we need to scan and record the reflections of essentially 40 million pictures in 0.2 of a second. And of course, the actual return light coming back from the retina is minuscule. There's another sketch of the overall system. And I should say that every one of these elements, from the laser to the scanner to the wide sweep mirror and the ellipsoidal mirror, these were hugely difficult components to make within the precision and tolerances that we needed. And as a consequence, basically, we had to ask our investors to keep pouring in money as we stumbled our way forward through one technical challenge after another. That polygon spinning at nearly 40,000 RPM was a nightmare for us. For those who are familiar with CCD technologies, you put in a photon, you get an electron. We used a different technology. It's called an avalanche photodiode. You put in one photon, you get 200 electrons out. And that was an essential benefit in reducing the light shock to the patient. Getting a polygon to spin, that's that multifaceted rotating component there, was very, very complicated to do it with the necessary precision. And to reduce the drag, we enclosed it in an atmosphere of helium. It took us 3 years to discover that actually nobody could make these devices to the tolerance we required. Our yield at that time was 15%, and they all broke within 12 months. So it's a testament to the tolerance of our investors that they didn't abandon ship at that time. It was bad luck, and it wasn't an area we were expecting to have problems, but that's just the way of life, isn't it? To make an ellipsoidal mirror of the size that we envisaged is also, well, it was beyond the ken of man at that time. We grew them by a process of electrical deposition, but it took us over time. In fact, it probably has taken us almost 20 years to reach the level of precision that we have within our devices today. Another component of the system, which was vital to ease of use, was intuitive patient positioning. The patient, when brought up to the machine, had to be aligned in 3 axes, plus or minus 1/4 of a millimeter. And doing that intuitively was a big challenge. But here we have a premature baby, age perhaps 26 weeks gestation, doing exactly that. And of course, eventually we did reach the summit of the mountain, and we shipped our first device It wasn't as good as I would have liked it to be at that stage in the game, but it was still effective in capturing ultra wide field images of the retina without dilation and without contact. It was easy enough for a 5-year-old to use. This is the first machine being shipped to America in 99. And it did what it said on the tin, which was it did make practitioners consistently good. And it was, of course, very fast, and a 5-year-old could use it. And even though the early images were somewhat distorted, they did detect a lot of disease which would otherwise gone unnoticed. That white circle is the normal field of view for an undilated exam. And this patient was a 14-year-old female, had leukemia and was undiagnosed. She made a good recovery. This small white dot is a cholesterol embolus, and identifying that is very important in terms of putting that patient on aspirin and reducing the stroke risk. This patient has a form of colorectal cancer on genetics. Now, you would think that given all that we've done and all that we have been through, that we would be widely accepted by the market, but of course that's not the case, especially if your technology is particularly innovative, and if you perhaps have a paradigm shift saying, well, my technology is as good as, or perhaps even better than, the status quo. So this was a phrase that was used to describe my endeavors, which I'm particularly proud of, an extravaganza of charlatanism. This was by somebody in an important position within UK optometric world. But anyway, undaunted, we did have another problem. Of course, we'd built a fantastically effective device, but a retail price would have been $100,000 typically, maybe a bit less, maybe a bit more, in a marketplace where people were not spending more than perhaps $5,000 or at most $10,000. So if we stuck with that, which wouldn't be particularly profitable for us in any event, we would perhaps sell 100 machines. Just to update you on what Darren said earlier, we now actually have 22,000 machines out there. And that was done in part by giving them away, to all intents and purposes, free. So free of capital cost, we place them and charge a small fee, £15 per patient. When we stopped counting the number of patients, we had done over 200 million patients. People are now quite happy to pay the cash price of, which has come down somewhat from perhaps 50 to 120,000, depending on the capability. Of course, it hadn't been my intention to build a company at all. I assumed that if I built a prototype, the players in the marketplace would swoop down upon it and commercialize it, but they didn't. They rejected it, and they rejected us and our protection. So we were obliged to field teams to place these devices and support them. And we started in America, and we met with considerable success. But we had to provide fairly intense support to our customer base because, of course, we were placing machines all the way across America, and they weren't always reliable. And when they were reliable, then often the doctors found it difficult to deal with the clinical findings, so we had to bring in specialists and run specialist training courses. But the end game was that we built up a tremendous cadre of doctors who supported us over the years. There was something like 200 doctors here in Scotland some years ago, and many of these doctors are still with us, perhaps on their third or fourth generation of our device. Here's just one example of the clinical significance of ultra-wide field. Again, there's that circle in the middle, and the accepted wisdom was in the management of diabetic retinopathy was if there was no pathology in that central pole, the patient would not be at risk and would not have peripheral retinopathy. And if they did, it would be extremely rare and not clinically significant. Well, you can perhaps see these red blotches here. Sure, these are bleeds in the periphery. And what has been discovered, of course, is it always starts in the periphery. And if you have significant amounts, then the likelihood of the patient progressing to sight-threatening retinopathy is 4 times what it might otherwise be. So just giving people this extra information in a fast and simple way that's patient-friendly, easily accessible, makes a terrific difference to the clinical management and outcomes of patients, not just with diabetic retinopathy, but across a wide range of diseases. There's a conventional fluorescein angiogram. Here's an ultra-wide field angiogram. You can see all this area here of pathology, peripheral ischemia, none of which would be visible in the conventional exam. So just another example. And here, this is an interesting image in the sense that it's done using autofluorescence imaging. That's the natural emission of light by the retina if it's excited. And although this was technically known about, it wasn't practical. Here we've got fluid produced in the below the retina, and it's dribbling down under the influence of gravity. And that's a completely new imaging modality. And of course, it's the technology's application in imaging infants very important. And this is the images of that child, including angiograms, very demanding to take under with manual techniques, and perhaps would probably be avoided. And over time, of course, we did build up relationships, research relationships. These are sites all over America who began investigating the utility of our device. And over time, we demonstrated these capabilities, a 66% improvement in disease detection, as much as 50% reduction in the time to manage disease. And we drove, the technology made it possible to drive forward new understandings and new treatments in many conditions. And we certainly hope for many better outcomes. So I'm just aware that I've been talking along now for quite a bit, but I'll just bring you back to the cause of this adventure, which was my son. This is him on his 20th birthday. And regrettably, shortly after that photograph, the retina of his fellow eye detached. Actually, that is the image of his eye. We had a machine in the Edinburgh Eye Pavilion. We went there, and he and I personally imaged him and made the diagnosis, given that there were no retina specialists there. It was a very severe issue because he already had a prophylactic buckle which had to be removed and replaced, and his retina put back on. He self-imaged himself. He worked as he was recovering at our factory, and he self-imaged himself and detected subretinal fluid. A vitrectomy was necessary, and that created a cataract. However, the cataract was removed, and well, I should say that prior to the cataract being removed and having only the peripheral vision in one eye, i.e. no central vision, and totally blind in the other eye, he was still able to journey and navigate in the Arctic pack ice, which just goes to show how well people can get along and adjust to their capabilities. shortly after that photograph was taken, he elected to have his cataract removed, and he went to being able to see without visual correction for the first time in his life, which was a fabulous outcome, obviously. Unfortunately, we still were a victim of some setbacks. He received a blow to the eye when walking home with a friend one night. It was just a spontaneous thuggery. The vitreous was disrupted, and there were worries that, of course, that he would have a retinal detachment. He was blinded by the blood in his eye, but the technology was able to see through that and give some hope that the no detachment had occurred. And indeed, it cleared up, and he did make a full recovery, which was great. And there you are, 200 million patients, 200 sites all around the world, including 10 in Greenland. And we move forward at a pace then from that base through a range of new devices, which introduced a number of capabilities. And indeed, in the most recent device, we have a totally additional technology, optical coherence tomography, which allows you to image the subsurfaces of the retina. So there's a range of the images and modality types that are available nowadays. We have, instead of just the one article, which I relied on for many years, we have now over 2,000 peer-reviewed journals, and we are used in visualization of 150 disease states, and we changed the management in many conditions very substantially. We've also created a new genre of publishing as the ultra-wide field angiography and imaging. And here, perhaps one of the proudest moments was I was given this book by a doctor in Japan who had published it. This is helping students do retinal detachment surgery, and almost exclusively illustrated using our images. So that was pretty wonderful. We even became celebrities in a Tom Clancy novel. And of course, as Darren mentioned, we were awarded the McRobert Award for Engineering and presented to us by His Royal Highness the Duke of Edinburgh at Buckingham Palace. That's Leif getting a chat from Philip and me describing the imaging technique. And indeed, despite some initial reticence, giving the Duke his first retinal exam. And just finally, winding up here, there was a chap in the palace who was totally blind, and he asked me to image him so that he could show his daughter why he was blind. And he had certain devastating AMD in one eye, but the fellow eye was just completely black. And I thought, this is a bit strange. Clearly he has dense cataract. And one of the aspects of our technology, which is particularly powerful, is the ability to see through cataracts. And I couldn't say for sure, but it seemed to me that the state of AMD in his fellow eye was nothing like as progressed. So I said, I think, Oleg, you should have your cataract removed and see how you go, because despite what everybody's saying, there may be some chance there. So as a result of that exam, he did have the cataract removed. And when I returned from my most recent expedition, he told me that he was able to see his children, his grandchildren, which was obviously a pretty nice outcome from a visit to the palace. Okay, that's it, I think. Yeah, go. Thank you for being such an attentive host. I'll hand back.
Thank you, Douglas. Darren, if you'd like to come back as well. If anyone does have any questions, please put them in the chat and we'll relay them to Doug. I've got a couple through already, Douglas. The first one is actually for myself, and I just wondered if you could tell us a little bit about your early career before the big boat expedition. Are you an engineer by training? Are you an electronics engineer? What's your background in that sense?
I attempted to be an electronics engineer, but I was pretty dismal at it. I became an industrial designer, which suited my skills a lot better. I think my most dominant skill was my ability to hire people that were much better than me.
Okay. And did you have a career before?
Well, yes, I worked as an industrial designer in an electronics company, and then I founded my own product design consultancy, which had the advantage of I could have been able to leave it when I wanted to go off on these expeditions, which I duly did.
Great. Thank you. We've got a question in from Derek Petrie asking, in retrospect, do you think if the original panoramic 200 was smaller and lighter, it would have gained acceptance in the UK optometry market?
I'm skeptical about that, Derek. I think you are the Derek that a long time ago worked with us. I think there's a chance, and obviously it is now smaller and lighter, and it is now accepted in the UK optometry market. It's widely utilised. But the inertias of markets are quite substantial, and I think it was necessary to have acceptance within the US market and have KOLs batting for us there before we were really able to properly penetrate the UK market. And that's not just optometry, but also the NHS, or in particular the NHS, which is known to be a lagging indicator as far as technology adoption is concerned.
Thank you. And we have a question from Sarah Newton. Sarah's firstly thanking you for the account of your journey and outcomes, which she's personally very grateful for. She's then asking, has the technology been used on animals?
It's been used on rats, but animals that have snouts present a particular problem. So our attempts to do apes at Edinburgh Zoo were not particularly successful. Any flat-faced animal or fish, that would be fine.
Right. We have another question here asking how you might see the technology that you're currently using at Optos progressing into the future, and whether it's going to open up any new ways of imaging.
Well, ultra-wide field angiography is essentially a new field, as is ultra-wide field ICG and autofluorescence. Whilst these were theoretically possible, they were impractical. Ultra-wide field OCT is coming off our production line. Right now we can do steerable, what you might call midfield OCT, mid field of view anyway. That's available today, and ultra-wide field will come very shortly. I can't say beyond that. We spend more per year on research and development than we did in the first 10 years of Optos existence. So I would certainly expect innovations to keep coming.
That seems to be the end of our questions. Darren, do you want to jump in at all?
Yeah, I mean, some of the questions that I wanted to ask have already been asked by other members. I must admit, listening to your lecture, I'm actually amazed at how you navigated through this maze, and I'm not too sure which is actually more impressive. Your boat building with chicken wire and concrete and going to Tierra del Fuego, actually embarking on this mammoth, well, what can you say, invention, and getting it to market. Both are pretty impressive, to say the least, and I think anybody looking at what you've done, would consider it to be a huge achievement by any stretch of the imagination. So no, a very, very enlightening, interesting lecture, to say the least.
We've got two further questions actually, Darren, that have just come in. I'll take Professor Ansari's first. Firstly, he's saying thank you for the excellent presentation, and he's then asking, how is colorectal detected from a lesion in the retina? Colorectal cancer detected from a lesion in the retina.
Well, though perhaps I went through it too quickly, but there were in the image there were three very distinctive nevus-like tumors there. I'm not sure if tumor is the right word, but I'm talking about the particular version of inherited colorectal cancer known as FAP. I can't remember what the initials stand for. Sorry about that, a while ago.
And thank you. And Richard Knight is firstly thanking you for the mind-blowing journey and so inspirational, and then is asking, do you have any experience of imaging the effects of toxoplasmosis damage to the retina?
Yes, many images. Yes. Yeah.
Okay. And a question from Zeiss saying, we use the Silverstone every day and it's helped save many RD patients' eyesights. Loves the technology.
Oh, thank you. Pleased to know that.
Okay, so that now does seem to be the end of the question. So if I may, Darren, I'll hand back to you.
Right, thank you, Richard. As I said, I think it's a truly inspirational lecture and very interesting, to say the least. I do have one small question. Are the penguins sleeping or deceased?
They are actually sleeping, yes.
Oh, right.
Obviously, this is on another voyage. And then I think it was 2007, we sailed to the Antarctic, and these poor fellows are suffering from heat stroke. They will get up again later, but they've just been fed and they're having a nap. Yeah.
Okay.
I would like
to hear it.
I would like to say something which occurs to me. It's not really come across. Both the voyage to South America and, in particular, the development of Optos technology rely. Okay, I'm giving the lecture, but it's both of these enterprises were a success because of the cohesion of a huge group of people, many of whom didn't know what they were doing when they started and learned. But these are team efforts. I may be the sort of spokesperson for the end game, but I hope I know that these individuals made colossal contributions without whom we would just never have got anywhere.
Yeah, impressive. And one final, very quick question. Regards Optimap, what's the roadmap going forward? Where do you see?
I had to I had a one word business mission, if you like, or philosophic mission, which was to make wide field imaging either Optimap or lookalikes ubiquitous within retinal examination worldwide. So we're still ashore. We've had a lot of success, and we just go from strength to strength, even here now in year 30. But we're still a long way from ubiquity. 22,000 systems is a lot of systems. 200 million patients, we're probably a lot further than that, but there's a lot of people we still need to reach. We still need to have, they still need to have access to our technology.
Yeah. That's wonderful. Thank you, Douglas, as again, a thoroughly inspiring lecture. All it remains for me to say now is to thank the various people involved during the course of the year. Certainly Joe, who looks after the CRC awards. Thank you hugely for your help and support. Thank you, Michael, for looking after tonight's technical side of things. I'm sure I would have fudged it if it was put in my hands, and it wouldn't have been anywhere near as slick, to say the least. There's a whole bunch of other people that operate in the background, and certainly the various people who are involved with the CRC selection. Thank you very much for your input over the years, and I look forward to looking at the next cohort and seeing if we can award the medal going forward. Outside of that, all I can say is you're a very worthy recipient, Douglas. Thank you for the lecture. Thank you all for attending tonight, all members, and I hope to see you all in the near future. Thank you so much.
Thank you.